The women's rights movement marks July 13, 1848 as its beginning, when a simple afternoon tea transformed into a women's rights convention, a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. This convention, which celebrated its 150th anniversary in 1998, spurred the beginning of the fight for suffrage, equal rights, equal pay, and respect in society. Though the movement was met with much backlash throughout history, it has made its way into today's political climate, where men and women everywhere continue to fight for the end of misogyny and the beginning of gender equality. Today, we will be focusing on the women's rights movement in the 1970s, a monumental time full of triumphs and victories against the unrelenting forces of sexism, objectification, and gender discrimination. The 1960s and 70s are seen as the second wave of the women's rights movement, following the first successful wave in the early 1900s, during which the women's movement succeeded in winning the right to vote. The 1970s were characterized by many feminist activities and events, including the struggle for the Equal Rights Amendment, called the ERA, the creation of Miss Magazine, historic trials such as Roe v. Wade, Title IX of the Constitution, and combating sexual harassment. As in most movements, the women's rights movement outreach and progress was driven by peaceful protest against injustice. One example of this occurred in September 1968, which was the Miss America protest. This protest took place at the 1968 Miss America pageant in Atlantic City and was organized by New York radical women, who objected to the commercialization and racism of the pageant, in addition to the way it judged women on ludicrous standards of beauty. Another prominent protest that took place during this time was the Women's Strike for Equality. The nationwide Women's Strike for Equality occurred on August 26, 1970, and saw women using various creative tactics to draw attention to the ways in which they were treated unfairly. On the streets and in businesses, women stood and demanded equality and fairness. Since then, August 26th has been named Women's Equality Day. Finally, a protest that still continues today was the Take Back the Night protest that began in 1976. In multiple countries all around the world, feminists gathered to draw attention to violence against women and to reclaim the night for women. The initial protests turned into annual events of communal demonstration and empowerment that included rallies, speeches, vigils, and other activities. The annual U.S. rallies are now known usually as Take Back the Night, a phrase heard at a 1977 gathering in Pittsburgh and used in the title of a 1978 event in San Francisco. These are just a few of American feminists' most significant protests that brought together thousands of activists who worked for women's rights. As a result of the women's movement, society saw many changes brought about by the hard work of men and women all around the U.S. These changes were legislative, societal, economic, and were overall not just a step forward for women, but a step forward for humanity. An example of an enormous legislative change that for many characterized the 1970s was the outcome of the Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade. This is one of the most famous, if not the most well-understood, Supreme Court cases in the United States. Roe v. Wade was the historic Supreme Court decision that overturned a Texas interpretation of abortion law and succeeded in making abortion legal all around the United States. The Roe v. Wade decision held that a woman, with her doctor, could choose abortion in early months of pregnancy without legal restriction, and with restriction in later months, based on the right to privacy. Because of the outcome of this case, all state laws limiting women's access to abortions during the first trimester were invalidated based on the 9th and 14th Amendment. This victory was a step forward for women everywhere that asserted that women had the right to control what happened with their body without requiring the input of another man. Roe v. Wade resulted in an astronomical social change, where more and more women took charge of their own lives, maintaining pride in who they were, and asserting that no man or woman had control over what they chose to do with their lives. Another social change that occurred with the movement was the creation of Miss Magazine. Founded by powerful women such as Gloria Steinem and others in 1972, Miss became a famous part of the feminist movement. It was a publication edited by women that spoke to women's issues, a voice of the revolution that had wit and spirit, a women's magazine that issued articles about beauty products and exposed the control that many advertisers assert over content in women's magazine. The title of Miss Magazine came from the then current controversy over the correct title for women. Men had Mr., which gave no indication of their marital status. Etiquette and business practices demanded that women either use Miss or Mrs. Many women did not want to be defined by their marital status, and for a growing number of women who kept their last name after marriage, neither Miss nor Mrs. was technically a correct title in front of their last name. Miss Magazine, spelled M-S and then a period, gave power to women everywhere, providing further assertion to naysayers that women could be and were powerful and dignified, just as much as men were, toppling sexist stereotypes about the beauty, power, and capability of women. This was also one of the economic gains of the women's movement. With women's empowerment as the subject of the decade, more and more women began taking up high-profile and demanding jobs, such as politicians and entrepreneurs. The women's movement saw many women becoming independent in their wealth and earning, and as time passed, it became acceptable for women to be the breadwinners of their families. This part of the movement evolved to one of the biggest objectives of the women's rights movement today, the struggle for equal pay in the workforce. During the 1960s and 70s, feminists catapulted the idea of women's liberation into the media and the public consciousness. Though there is still much work to be done to ensure equal rights for all, without the successes of the 60s and 70s, the world would not be as equal and fair as it is today. Thanks to the progress in the late 1900s, gender equality is a goal within the sights of all Americans, and the American consciousness for gender equality and anti-misogyny was made what it is today.